live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists. This is Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric.
We're still picking up the pieces, searching for the missing, and counting the dead from Hurricane Helene, and yet another disturbance is forming in the same area where Helene originated to our south. It's October 1st. Still a very busy month in hurricane season. We have the latest models to track, plus a live Q&A coming up on Tracking the Tropics. Welcome back into the Stream Center, folks. We've been streaming all week long about Hurricane Helene and the aftermath of Helene across multiple states. If you're looking for coverage of Helene, we have it elsewhere on WFLA.com, trackingthetropics.tv, our Facebook and YouTube pages. The purpose of this live stream is to focus on what is ahead in the days and weeks ahead with a trio of meteorologists Rebecca Barry and Amanda Holly, the co-hosts, of course, of Tracking the Tropics, and our featured meteorologist today, joining us from WDHN in Dothan, Alabama, Brian Boggiano. You can use hashtag Hey Brian, hashtag Hey Amanda, hashtag Hey Rebecca, or yes, we'll look for hashtag Hey JB in the comment section. We're going to begin our live Q&A here coming up. If you have questions for our meteorologists, be sure to use one of those hashtags in the Facebook Live comment section, and we will animate them on screen. But first, we got to get to what's forming there to our south, and for that, we send it over to Amanda.
Yeah, and we are going to get there. I want to talk about the other two areas in the Atlantic prior to landing on and then staying on what could be developing in the Western Caribbean, just because the rest of the tropics, they are active, right? So we got a lot of social media posts out there about what's going on, what we're supposed to be watching, and what could be forming. Right now, we have Tropical Storm Kirk. It is expected to be a major hurricane. Right now, it is still a tropical storm, but the forecast recurves it into the Atlantic. This is what we call a classic fish storm. Joyce, if you remember that storm, that actually dissipated earlier today, and Isaac dissipated as well. So this is the latest storm to form, Tropical Storm Kirk, and this is the 11 a.m. advisory. Again, expected to be a major Category 3 hurricane, but recurving even before it gets to Bermuda. So again, a fish storm, and that one is not going to impact land anytime soon. So that's good news. Oh, we went all the way down to the end of our graphic system. Also, we have out there an area that we are watching, a tropical wave that just came off the coast of Africa, and that one has a 90% chance of developing. It will likely become our next named storm. That one is the little L that just came off the coast, and those are the forecast models showing that it's going to follow in a pretty similar pattern as Tropical Storm Kirk is. It will likely develop, could also become a hurricane, but it will likely recurve as well. So those are the two areas that are way out in the Atlantic, and we're not concerned about those, which is very good news. Now let's bring our attention to the Western Caribbean. This is the area that has been on social media since, even before Helene dissipated. And this is in the area that Helene formed. This is very normal to look in this area this time of the year. The differences, though, are stark with this system and Helene. It is going to be moving into the Gulf of Mexico in the next few days, but the forecast models are not nearly in as agreement as they were with Helene. That's why the National Hurricane Center actually dropped their chances of development over the next 7 days. It's down to 40%. It was at 50%. I will say forecast models, most of them do bring that moisture into the Gulf of Mexico. We're looking at the GFS versus the Euro right now. And this is going all the way into early next week, Monday and Tuesday of next week. And they just meander this moisture. Some of them develop it. Some of them develop it into a weak system. Some of it move it north into the northern Gulf of Mexico. Some of them literally just keep it in the Gulf of Mexico for the next 10 days. There are a lot of question marks with this. I do think, though, the one thing that we have going for us is that the environment in the Gulf of Mexico is not anywhere near the same as it was with Helene. We knew Helene was moving into a primed environment for strengthening. It was moving over really warm waters, didn't really have any shear to battle. Those are kind of the opposites now because Helene moved through the Gulf, used some of that warm water. There's still plenty of warm water for a tropical system to strengthen in the Gulf of Mexico. But the one difference that we have with Helene is actually wind shear. And there's going to be a lot of wind shear in the northern Gulf, helping to keep this from organizing. That's kind of why, one of the reasons most of the models kind of keep it in the Gulf and just meander it there, because it doesn't really have anywhere to go. It can't punch through north into that high high shear environment. So this is something to watch. We're not saying disregard this, because some of the models do develop it and bring it into the west coast of Florida, but every model run is different, and every model is different with the development of this system. So it's something that we're watching, but I will say the timing has pushed back on this, guys. So we are looking now at a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday event of next week, with even just some moisture making its way into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. So our forecast is going to change.
Yeah.
But this does not look like a Helene situation at the moment.
And even if you remember, the earliest models from Helene kept pushing back the timing a little bit. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that it's a gyre storm. When it comes off of that particular region from the Central American gyre, we do see them taking a little bit longer to develop. We see them taking a beat to start to get more organized. And we saw that reflected with Helene in the early parts of the intensification. Once it overed Cuba and entered the Gulf, we thought it would start intensifying almost immediately, but it took about
24 hours.
Yeah, 12 to 24 hours.
It was a long time. So we are watching it. Brian, what are your thoughts, bringing you in as our featured meteorologist? What are your thoughts on this system, coming off the heels of Helene and looking at the forecast models with this one?
Well, Amanda, I am in agreement. We are looking at, once again, wind shear being elevated as the storm moves to the north and the west and does enter the Gulf of Mexico. This is typical for this time of year. We know we do see the jet stream start to dig south. Cold fronts also start to dig south. So with that, you do get increased wind shear. And that's what we are seeing potentially with this wave that is coming off the heels of Helene. That's not to say that it is going to be a weak storm regardless. Most models do keep it rather disorganized, because you do have various competing areas for vorticity, which is pretty common when you get these storms that come off the Central American gyre. But what we're looking at is wind shear will become more hostile as the storm moves to the north and the west. But around this time of year, this is when, yes, we do look at the potential for more homegrown storms with the gyres active, with wind shear increasing across the basin. So this is typically when a lot of storms form in the Caribbean. They curve to the north and east as a result of the dip in the jet stream, as well as approaching cold fronts. So this is typically when we watch the eastern Gulf. But yes, just because we do have those warmer waters, it doesn't mean you're going to get the strong storms, because as we've seen the rest of this season, you don't need just warm waters themselves. You need a lot more. Like, you need the proper patterns of sinking and rising air. You need adequate, or really less than, or really, what I'm trying to say is you need lower levels of wind shear. And as the storm moves through, we're not really seeing that with models right now. So there's still a lot of variables that we are considering, and whether the storm is disorganized or not, we are still looking at that rainfall threat for South and Central Florida, and especially in areas that had the rainfall. This is something we're not going to keep our guard down on.
So, Amanda, do we have spaghettis for this yet, or just the GFS and Euro? Those are the only long-term models that we have right now.
We have a couple others, the Canadian, the Icon. There are a couple other long-term models that we do look at, but this isn't an area of showers and thunderstorms yet, so that's why we don't have. It's not an invest. That's why the models keep kind of delaying that time frame, because it's just not there yet.
Can we bring up the orange NHC sort of area where this is expected to develop? We're going to start to take questions, everybody, using the hashtags on your screen. You can punch them in right now. Hashtag Hey Amanda, hashtag Hey Brian, hashtag Hey Rebecca, hashtag Hey JB. Any one of those hashtags with your Facebook Live comment, we'll bring it into the conversation here. But let me just point out, this would be, should this form, Rebecca, we're talking about this being Leslie, right? Tropical Storm Leslie. The chances of that happening are, what?
Well, actually, it's probably a better chance for that system that's off the coast of the Cabo Verde Islands to take Leslie. This would most likely be Milton.
Okay, so Milton would be to our south. Leslie would be closer to Africa, basically.
Yes, yeah. Leslie's the next fish storm that Amanda was talking about at the beginning. This would most likely be Milton.
It felt like it was just yesterday we were talking about how we were up to Ernesto, Francine, Gordon, and all of a sudden
we caught up.
We caught up.
Caught up really fast.
Yeah. Brian, hurricane season, I mean, through, midway through September, I mean, we were just kind of, waiting for, it was just kind of that nervous energy, right? We were waiting for these storms to form. And now on the back end of September into October, here they come.
And yeah, it's not uncommon to have these backlog seasons like 2022. Like, remember, we went through July and August without any named storms. Then September, we just had a whole march of storms come in that resulted in Ian, that resulted all the way to Nicole. So even though our August that season was below average, we did finish that season relatively on par with what normal hurricane seasons should be like. But also this season, what we were looking at, we did have stable air that was in the atmosphere. Even though we did have the warm water, once again, that stable air, that was an issue with the warmer levels in the upper troposphere. We were also looking at patterns of abnormally high wind shear. So as a result of that, activity was really kept at bay. But then we did see conditions slowly become more favorable And as that happened, we did see activity ramp up once again. So now we're looking on par with finishing maybe near average or slightly above average this hurricane season. And just today, or I think it was yesterday, Colorado State released their outlooks in the next couple of weeks. We will likely have above average activity. And this is because of this activity we're seeing in the Atlantic. This is because of the potential for development we're seeing in the Southern Gulf, that is, and the Western Caribbean. But that is still a wild card as to whether that develops, how strong it is, or where it tracks. So the conditions, if they come together right at the right time of the season, you will see activity develop and you will see the basin become more favorable. So we are still in peak season, and August, September, October, those are the peak months we tend to look at for the activity. So it's not uncommon that you do get this activity continuing through October.
Let's get into our meteorologist Q&A. Of course, you can use any of the hashtags on your screen to ask us a question. We'll be fielding it for our trio of meteorologists, Amanda, Rebecca, and Brian, joining us from WDHN. Kim May, hashtag HJB, please tell me no more storm surge. And while we have long-range models that are showing, the GFS and the Euro, as Amanda pointed out, these are systems or models that are showing the system meandering in the Gulf, as you put it. It's way too early to be talking about, potential impacts. We don't even know if this is going to form or where it would head if it did form.
Yeah, but I will say the models that do form this and into an organized system, it doesn't look the same size or intensity as Helene was. So we got the storm surge with Helene because of the large, expansive wind field that Helene had. And we're not looking at that organized of a system with this if it were to develop. So it is still early to talk about anything like that, any kind of specifics. But at the moment, it doesn't look like it would be the same scenario.
Don wants to know, hashtag KJB, will you be doing daily live streams, I guess is what he meant, through the development of this storm? Rebecca, we're just not there yet, right?
So I anticipate the next live stream a little bit later this week when the models kind of agree. When we know more, that would probably be the next opportunity for that, because if you remember, you and I sat down for a Helene live stream way before it became a thing, and I said this is going to be dated by 2:00, and sure enough, by the afternoon models, they had actually come together. The Euro had gotten on board, and it would have been a much more valuable stream just a few hours later. So I think that we're going to try to hold back until we know a little bit more this time. Yeah, and
it's interesting on Facebook Live towards the beginning of the stream when Amanda was giving her forecast, there was somebody who put out a comment saying, it's way too early to be talking about this disturbance to our south. And then that person got a response from about 3 or 4 other people saying, well, look at what just happened with Helene. I wish I had more
people
advanced
are curious.
Notice. Yes. Yeah, weather curiosity is at a peak right now. Brian, I'm sure that, you're seeing it on social media. We're all seeing it on social media, just the amount of conversations taking place about weather and about Helene. It's pretty significant.
Oh yeah, it's very significant. People they want to know the answers. They want to know everything at the moment, but there's sometimes we just don't know, and there's a lot of uncertainty, whether it's the models are saying something. There's just a lot of uncertainty, a lot of misinformation out there, but that's where we step in because we're the ones that explain this. We're the ones that put this into simplified terms, and that's what we're trusted to do.
Let's get to the next question. It comes in from Steve, hashtag KJB. What will this do to Clearwater Beach with the expected storm surge to add to the already record amount that they are digging out from now and will be for weeks? I have friends on Clearwater Beach. Steve brings up a good point. I think it's important to point out again that the long-range models were just waiting for some more, clarity on what this disturbance could do should it form. But again, we're talking about an area that is now really vulnerable, especially on our Gulf Coast, right? On Florida's Gulf Coast, areas that have been completely devastated by Helene. The last thing people need is a follow-up storm.
Exactly. And I can tell you that if the scenarios play out where the storm moves a little bit faster and a little bit more to the north, there's so much shear there that it's going to be so weak, we wouldn't really expect any storm surge. It would just be passing showers for our area. If the other scenarios start to play out where the storm resists going north, most likely because of the shear, and hangs out a little bit longer over the warm waters of the Gulf, a little bit further south, and then makes its impact anywhere from Tampa to the Keys, that's kind of what some of those forecast models are hinting at, is At most, it would be a Category 1 storm, and the Tampa Bay and Clearwater area would most likely be on the non-dirty side of the storm with offshore winds and reverse surge. So that's kind of what we're looking at scenario-wise. I don't want to make it too friendly of a forecast. Would you say, are there any...
Yeah, we're not disregarding this just yet, but at the moment, I'm not as concerned, with the storm surge of this one in particular as we were with Helene.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be interesting because we have so much sand washed up.
I think the biggest
rainfall
problem is going to be the rainfall. Yeah, because there's going to be moisture coming this way regardless. So we are talking about, continued passing downpours. We saw quite a few on Saturday, which is a double-edged sword. Everything does need rinsed off, but everything also needs to dry out. So unfortunately, it does look like the moisture is going to stick around regardless.
Yeah.
Jen, asking about location. I mean, likely too early to say, obviously, about Central Florida or Big Bend. But again, this speaks to a bit of a paranoia that has developed in Florida.
Yeah, unfortunately, the models are all over the place. It could be anywhere from Panhandle to Key West. So.
Yeah. Every run is different. Each model, right? So you have every model, the GFS, the Euro, the Canadian, the Icon, and several others that we can look at as well. Those are run, between 2 and 4 times a day. And each one of those, they're just wildly different because there's nothing there yet for them to grasp onto. And they're not quite in as agreement as they were with Helene.
Now, one area that is interesting, of course, because it's, part of Florida, but it's literally our southernmost point is Key West. Brian, this question's coming for you. It comes from Sue on Facebook Live, says that she's supposed to fly out to Key West from Orlando next Thursday morning. So if I'm reading this correctly, that would be Thursday, October 10th, should I cancel the trip. So people already have their trips out to, I would imagine, Sue, I hope it's a vacation for you, but also at the same time, I hope it doesn't get canceled. What do we say for Sue here, Brian?
At this point in time, I would say no. It's too early to determine if you have to cancel your trip, but I would say no, just because we're not expecting the storm to be strong. We're not expecting it to be a big problem maker, minus maybe some heavy rainfall. So all in all, I would say trips are good to go for now. We'll keep watching, and if anything changes, we will let you know.
Let's go to Austin up next, talking about this disturbance and the U.S. model. Okay, so the U.S. model is the GFS, and we always compare it to the Euro, the European model. Take us through it, Amanda. What do we got?
Yeah, so I'll grab the mouse here for you. So the GFS is the American model, the U.S. model, and that's the green lines that you see there on your screen. And again, some runs develop it, some runs keep it on the weak side, very sheared out, and just moisture coming in our direction. So what you're looking at are pressure lines. And so when we are looking at this as a forecast, we look for a lot of those circles tightly packed together. That would indicate a very strong storm. And we're just not seeing that with this, either on the Euro or the GFS. But in general, as I continue, this is next Monday now. So as I continue to go out, the green circles kind of meander apart. This is Tuesday, still just kind of hanging out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. The new run came in. So you can see where the green L ended up. That is where the last run took it. Well, now the new run keeps it in the middle of the Gulf until the middle of next week. So that's what the U.S. model is showing right now. Again, it did really well with Helene. And at the moment, it's just kind of meandering it.
Robinson says, #here, Becca, can we talk? What are we talking in terms of preparedness? Can we simplify the timeline here?
So I think by Thursday, we'll have a better idea of what scenario is going to be playing out. That'll give you the weekend to make any preparations that we think are necessary. I think it's going to include restocking anything that you use from your hurricane kit. If you're still without power, that's going to make it more difficult for you. I don't think we're going to be dealing with anything but heavy rain from this system for the most part, but I do want to caution that we could see a scenario play out where we saw some flooding from inland heavy rain. When you have a weaker system, a lot of times the rain's not evenly distributed around the center of rotation, and so you get large areas of rain that aren't moving very fast, kind of sitting over some inland areas. So that's my primary concern with the storm. So I think that you'll have the weekend to prepare because the timing has slowed down a little bit, The fastest models are Monday, Tuesday. More of the models are looking like mid to late next week.
Yeah, which is vastly different from what they showed, a couple of days ago. A couple of days ago, it was like a Friday through Sunday time frame. Now it's really been pushed back. So we've got time.
I'm going to bring up our entire team of meteorologists for this next set of questions. They come in from Mark and Chris on Facebook Live. #Hey Rebecca, when we hear along the coast, as far as surge goes, how far inland is along the coast? This is a great question that we can isolate and answer. But then I want to also piggyback this with Chris's comment on Facebook Live, saying #HeyJB, all local weather teams stressed the surge with Helene. Many didn't listen. And of course, we've noted that on previous streams of Tracking the Tropics. The storm surge was the big storyline with this particular event with Helene. But yeah, maybe we can come back to this with Mark. How far inland is along the coast to you?
And so it's highly dependent on your exact location. So about 10 years ago, Florida did an excellent job of investing in the storm surge model. And so they've mapped out the elevation of the entire state, and our storm surge forecast models are reflected by that. And so your neighbor may be expecting maybe in the red zone as far as the storm surge goes, and you might not be. And they have basically detailed mapped that down to almost the square mile. And that's what our evacuation zones are based on. So if your zone does get evacuated, that means the storm surge model for that run is forecasting water in your home. And so they called for Zone A evacuations in Tampa, and that's where we saw the flooding, was in Zone A. And so that's the answer to the question is how far inland. It's more how low you are. It's not necessarily, we can't say along the coast means, 1.2 miles in. It's your elevation, because you may get storm surge flooding in a river miles and miles away from the coastline once the water starts to enter that river.
It's not apples to apples as far as location goes.
Nope,
No,
it is not.
Yeah.
Like I think the most valuable thing you can do in a storm, Amanda and I were talking about this earlier, is knowing your elevation. I know my street is 12 feet and my house is 15 feet. So if we're expecting 12 feet of storm surge, there's going to be water on my road. 15 is going to be my house.
Let's move on to the next set. We have 3 more, and then we have to wrap up this edition of Tracking the Tropics. We'll go next to Debbie. You know what, Brian, you did such a great job with the previous question about travel. We're going to bring you right back in here. You'll be our travel agent, if you will, on this live stream. Debbie wants to know, I have a cruise planned on the 13th going to the Bahamas out of Fort Lauderdale. Any thoughts? It would probably be similar to your last response, right?
Yeah, I gotta say that's a nice area to go to especially from Fort Lauderdale, the Bahamas. Very beautiful there. But no, I would say don't cancel your trips. It's way too early to determine what kind of threat this will be. But I do think it is leaning more on the weak side. So you're generally looking at maybe some showers and a couple of thunderstorms, maybe some breezy conditions at times if you are going out there. And when you're on a cruise, you don't have the best days sometimes. Maybe you're going on a 5 or 7 day cruise. 1 or 2 of those days, you might have rain, you might have some heavy wind, you might have some rough seas. But all in all, I think you're going to be good when you go out on that cruise. So have fun on your vacation.
Yeah, I second that. Have a good time. Steve, with a great question, one that we could probably build an entire episode around, but I'm going to ask everyone to try to chime in here with their 2 cents. All 3 of you, if you would like to chime in on this one. Steve says, #HJB, is this the new norm for Florida? Living on pins and needles with every disturbance. Never had to do this so much as we have been lately. I don't know if you have it at your fingertips, Amanda, but there's a graphic that shows just how many storms have hit Florida in recent years. It's Rebecca, why don't we start with you? Steve wanted to know, is this going to be our relative normal going forward?
Well, I would just say that it's been our normal for a long time. If you remember the Charlie Francis Ivan Jean year, we just lived evacuated basically. And so it may feel more impactful to you if it impacted you this time, but I will say around the state, it's always impacting somebody around the state, and they feel like it's, the worst season they've ever had that year because it impacted their home or their business or their lives. And so certainly busy, but not, I don't think it's unusually busy. I just think we had a really nice lull,
Yeah.
in the early mid 2000s.
I agree. I think, it really just depends on the steering currents. We could ask the same question to Louisiana a couple of years ago. They were in our boat where they had storm after storm after storm, and they were asking that same question. Unfortunately, it just kind of depends year to year how the steering current's set up. And this year, just we're being impacted a little bit more, and it's been a long time since we've been significantly impacted. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. We'll have to do some long-term studies. We'll have to wait 10, 15, 20 years down the line to really say and answer that question accurately.
Brian, what do you think?
Being from Southeast Florida, we haven't had a major strike in over 20 years if you count Hurricane Jeanne, and it's been 30 plus years if you count Hurricane Andrew. But we do go through periods where we have elevated activity. Then we go through long lulls. 1940s in South Florida, we've had several major hurricane strikes. Then we went the 50s, much of the 60s, even much of the 70s without any major activity. And then the 1990s, Hurricane Andrew hit, and since then we've been quiet. So a lot of these areas, they do go through patterns where it's very active, then where it's very inactive. So we've had periods like this in Florida before, especially once again the 1940s. Then the 1950s, we calmed down. So it looks like we might be entering another era of heightened activity once again. Whether this is tied to the cold phase, the warm phase of the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, that is a possibility. But these storms, they do go through patterns where areas are hit with active patterns and then followed by inactive patterns. So right now, there are some areas that are in active patterns, such as the Gulf, and maybe Southeast Florida is one of these areas that there is a lull in activity.
We'll get to this final two here on tracking the tropics. I'll just take this one off the plates of our meteorologist. Sabrina wants to know about Cat 2, Cat 4. Is this next storm capable of intensifying in the same way? Amanda broke it down. There's tremendous amounts of wind shear and less favorable conditions for development compared to Helene. I would say stay tuned for future episodes of Tracking the Tropics because we'll have more clarity on this disturbance in the days ahead. Let's get to a question that's on everyone's minds to kind of wrap up this episode.
Yeah.
Beverly wants to know, when are we getting cold weather? Is it anywhere remotely in our sights? Because let me tell you something. The post Helene weather that we've had here, in Tampa Bay, no one's going to cry for us.
Rough.
Obviously, it's just, but it has not been normal for after a hurricane.
Normally it drags down a little bit of drier air and we get a break in the humidity and slightly cooler temperatures. Not this one. It kind of spun around and slung more moisture across the southeast instead. We were looking yesterday at the long-term forecast models and it looked like a 10-degree break in the dew points in about 10 days. Is that still playing out in this morning's forecast?
Yeah, Euro and the GFS both kind of agree on that middle of October, which is very average, by the way, for us to get a sweep of a cold front, which does a few things, right? It does bring us a nice drop in humidity, but it also really brings down the risk for tropical weather. So we all want it.
Cold front.
We all want it. But that is right now the graphic that you're looking at kind of just on the edge of us. But yeah, hopefully by maybe next weekend into, the 14-day time frame.
I am dreaming of 60s.
You're on cool weather, move out of Florida.
Brian, what about Dothan? What about, Alabama?
So we've been looking at our temperatures generally in the low to mid 80s with our low temperatures near 70, but I have noticed that moisture has been creeping up a little bit more as each day goes on. We're expecting a cold front to move through and then highs we generally back in the low 80s, lows possibly low to mid 60s. But yeah, when you're in Southeast Alabama, you're kind of like Florida's first cousin because it's not really much of a temperature difference.
Yeah, no, I did time in Mobile, so I'm very familiar with South Alabama and the weather there. But I'll tell you what, we are dreaming of a day when we can talk about the 60s here in Tampa Bay.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't want this cold front because of the cold weather. I want it for the tropics.
Yeah.
You guys, man.
We love our tropical weather.
Rebecca and Amanda are just two peas in a pod here, Brian. So look, we'll just, spotlight a couple of these final questions and comments that are coming in. The Max Fender 8 weather team's been working really hard. Mark just saying thanks for answering the question. Debbie saying thank you for all the help and expertise. It's been a long week of live streaming. Let's end this live stream by saying that we are sending our thoughts and prayers for everybody out there in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. We're talking about half a dozen states that saw significant impacts, and from Florida all the way into South Carolina, North Carolina, the Asheville area, and all the uncertainty there. We, of course, being at WFLA, we've been very focused on what's been going on Florida's Gulf Coast, flying Eagle 8 HD on our coast, providing everybody with a look at the aftermath here locally. But my goodness, if you look in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, a couple of other states, the devastation is widespread, and there are people that will be rebuilding. This has been a transition point in their lives as a result of this weather event. So Rebecca, Amanda, Brian, feel free to chime in here, but just passing along our very most heartfelt thoughts and prayers to everybody out there in the aftermath of Helene.
I would say the only silver lining to that is there's nothing more special about the community than post-storm.
That's where I was going with it.
You know, even though my neighborhood didn't see any damage, the first Cooper walk I took, everyone's out cleaning out the yards, checking on each other, talking about it. You still got power, eating my refrigerator. Even if you don't know your neighbors, sometimes that's how you get to know your neighbors. And so that's the only thing I like to watch after a storm is how everybody comes together and helps each other.
I mean, it's been incredible to see, you know, people trying to get back in their homes and just doing what they can. I mean, I know people, several people, 5 people at least that have, you know, been impacted, and we've reached out and they have a crew of people, and there's no shortage of help, which is really nice to see.
Yes, and one of my childhood friends actually lives in the Asheville area. And one thing that I've seen come out there is just the sense of community after this disaster. It's been really something special to watch. And just seeing how people at the local, state, at all levels are coming together to help people recover from this storm. It is truly something magical to see. And I hope for the best for the people who have been affected by this storm. And my thoughts are with them as they continue to recover and rebuild in the best way that they can.
Brian Boggiano joining us from WDHN in Dothan, Alabama. Give him a follow, of course, on social media. Brian, we hope to see you on future editions of Tracking the Tropics, of course, part of our Next Star Nation team of meteorologists that join us from around the United States. For Amanda, Rebecca, Brian, I'm JB. We'll continue to have future updates on this disturbance as we track its development and as it moves a little bit closer to the Yucatan and towards the United States. But for this edition of Tracking the Tropics, we will say farewell. And to everybody out there in the aftermath of Helene, all the best to you. We'll see you next time on Tracking the Tropics.
Find Tracking the Tropics on these platforms. And for storm updates, the latest models, and helpful resources, visit trackingthetropics.tv.